We're going to be talking about prayer and inspiration and meditation. One more chair. Julie, you can have. Prayer and inspiration and consultation and meditation and these things that go into. We're not going to try to create some kind of formula for making a decision, but just some things that we have that I think every person has to consider when we're making a decision. And then, since the theme of this presentation is making decisions based on Baha'i principles, I'd like to talk, or Doug and I would like to talk about some of the principles that we're talking about. Principles relating to service to the cause versus serving our family, and principles relating to careers and professions in the arts and the sciences and scholarship and
community life, the role of the individual in the community and how we fit into the community and how our decisions impact upon the community in the light of unity.
So we're going to be talking, hopefully, if we get time, about some of those things. And if anybody wants references, we have lots of them. And so rather than take the time during to yell out page numbers and so on, if you hear a quotation or something from the writings that you'd like a reference on, just come up afterwards or sometime during the weekend. I'd be happy to give it to you.
Okay. I think most of us are pretty well aware in general terms of what our purpose in life is all about, right? We say it every day. If we say the short obligatory prayer, it's constantly in our minds to know and to worship God, to know and to love God. But also there are other aspects that we're probably aware of: to be a part of an ever-advancing civilization, to be a proactive part of an ever-advancing civilization, and to develop those latent attributes which God has placed within, has reposited in each of us. So that perhaps can kind of give us a general framework to look at decision-making in, to consider our decisions in terms of our purpose in life as individuals.
And of course, as we develop individually, that's going to contribute towards the development of the world civilization. And as we make decisions about careers and so on, one thing that I thought of just now is this whole idea about there's no other more clear guide to our actions and more specific guide to our actions, particularly relating to service to the faith, than the global plans that we've been given by the Universal House of Justice, currently the 7-year plan. And the last message that we had, do you remember that, you have that reference, that one?
I don't think so.
Well, the one about the Universal House of Justice and the Rizwan message, this latest Rizwan message. I don't think I have the message with me, but the Universal House of Justice talked about the Baha'is contributing in the future to the development and the constructive use of modern technology. Okay, I'll go read.
We may therefore be utterly confident that the new throb of energy now vibrating throughout the cause will empower it to meet the oncoming challenges of assisting, as maturity and resources allow, the development of the social and economic life of peoples, of collaborating with the forces leading towards the establishment of order in the world, of influencing the exploitation and constructive uses of modern technology, and in all these ways enhancing the prestige and progress of the faith and uplifting the conditions of the generality of mankind.
Thanks. Now we know, for example, I'll quickly explain my way of looking at this. One is that we know that, for example, I don't even know it. Let's see. How can I ask you to know it? The idea that how can we're all waiting. We all know, for example, that we're anxious for the Baha'i faith to really transform the world. Well, we know we're doing it. The main reason for the evils now rampant in society is the lack of spirituality. And really what we have to offer as Baha'i is spiritual in nature. But I think all of us as Baha'is get anxious sometimes about, well, when are we going to really introduce our plan for disarmament or our plan for the development of and constructive uses of modern technology and our plan for this, because they're waiting for this. And so it's sort of like we zoomed light years into the future through this Rizwan message. The Universal House of Justice is saying we're going to be doing that. And I have to ask myself, how? You know, we don't have some design or some library or something that's clearly written from Baha'u'llah about constructive or exploiting or influencing exploitation and constructive use of modern technology. But it becomes apparent to me, for example, that as young people choose careers in the sciences and Baha'i young people and so on, and we influence that exploitation and constructive use. So as the Baha'is become more, and as we use the Baha'i principles more and more to make decisions in our lives, automatically we're not only just transforming ourselves spiritually, but we're transforming the world, and we're helping carry forward an ever-advancing civilization.
That's right. These few statements seem to imply a whole new plateau, a whole new arena where the faith is now moving into. In the 7-year plan message, for example, we remember that the House of Justice said, in the world at large, we can now see that the cause is now firmly established. So we have the firm establishment of the cause worldwide. We have the foundation from which we can move into these new areas as a community, as well as individuals, where our institutions are now solidly based sufficiently to start maturing and taking responsibility in an active and practical way in community service.
The Guardian talked about a force in the faith, and actually he capitalized it. He said that God-born force. Do you want to read part of that quotation? This is from Advent and Divine Justice, page 39.
It's not from Star Wars.
That's right. But he capitalizes force.
Katabi Yoda.
George Lucas probably did a little plagiarizing.
Forward by George.
I'm going to read the whole quote because it's very powerful. Most of you are probably familiar with it. The field is indeed so immense, the period so critical, the cost so great, the workers so few, the time so short, the privilege so priceless, that no follower of the faith of Baha'u'llah worthy to bear his name can afford a moment's hesitation. That God-born force, irresistible in its sweeping power, incalculable in its potency, unpredictable in its course, mysterious in its workings, and awe-inspiring in its manifestations, a force which, as the Bab has written, vibrates within the innermost being of all created things, and which, according to Baha'u'llah, has through its vibrating influence upset the equilibrium of the world and revolutionized its ordered life. Such a force, acting even as a two-edged sword, is under our very eyes sundering on the one hand the age-old ties which for centuries have held together the fabric of civilized society, and is unloosing on the other the bonds that still fetter the infant and as yet unemancipated faith of Baha'u'llah.
You know, I have a simple mind, and so I have to try to create images in my mind to understand these kind of quotations and these kind of explanations. And when I think of a force, I have to, even though it's not tangible, I have to try to visualize it. And my image is some kind of spiritual river that's just rushing through this planet, moving everything. You know, the two ways, of course, that it's affecting the world is it's tearing down all of the barriers to the establishment of the faith on one hand. Everything that's preventing us from doing our job on one hand is being torn down and obliterated, Baha'u'llah said. And on the other hand, this force is unloosening the fetters that bind our hands and spiritually speaking together, preventing us from delivering the word. Okay? In other words, it's like Bill Sears said, it's like the farmer goes out and tills up the soil. It's to an ant on the soil, it's a very violent experience. Okay? You can imagine this soil is being torn, but it's being prepared to receive some seeds. And if we don't get out there and sow those seeds, the wind and the rain will just crust it over again. And so this powerful spiritual river is just rushing through the planet. That's my image that I imagine, okay? And it's got this direction. It's the will of God. And how do I know? I guess that's the whole key that we're talking about this afternoon. How do I know that what the decision that I'm making today or yesterday or tomorrow or whatever is exactly congruent with that force? Because then it will have its greatest potency, the result of my decision, and that I can contribute the most to the cause of Baha'u'llah and the development of the world and the development of myself. How do I know that it's exactly congruent with that force that's just rushing through? I can't see it.
I think that's where we have to tie into our purpose. And it's interesting that you mentioned the 7-year plan, because certainly when we think about the 7-year plan, it's not just a neat bunch of goals that are organized and put together in a nice plan. It's stating destiny, in a way. And when we put ourselves in congruency with those plans, with the 7-year plan, with the second phases we're in right now, we are certainly becoming in harmony with our purpose in life, very specifically, very much right now. But we can speak in more general terms for now.
Okay. Let's talk about how we know where that force is. Because sometimes we may be well-meaning and we may read something in the writings that inspires us to do something for the cause, but it might be a little askew from that force. A little bit, it might be well-meaning, but a little, I guess our goal is to be perfectly congruent with it in all our decisions. And another point that I hope to make this afternoon is that everything we do, every breath we breathe can be serving the faith. There's not an activity, however sacred or profane, that we do that can't be serving the faith.
Maybe we should talk for a while about the process of decision making, what it is to make a decision as a Baha'i. We can speak, in specific terms, but perhaps what we should do first is lay down some principles, talk about the principles that impact our decision making, the standards that we apply, and so forth. An interesting quote here from The Guardian. Ruhia Khanum is quoting The Guardian in The Priceless Pearl, and she says in a letter to one of the friends, he, The Guardian, makes a highly revealing distinction. The time has come for the friends to think not as to how they should serve the cause, but how the cause should be served. A subtle distinction there. Not as to how they should serve the cause, but how the cause should be served.
It's sometimes not a matter of what we want to do for the cause or think we can do best for the cause, but what does the cause need right now?
I think it's a matter of setting priorities.
Okay, yeah. And how do we set priorities? I guess the most important thing for us to remember is that Baha'u'llah said that of all of the things that God has given us, well, I should just read the quotation. This is from the Gleanings in page 194. Know thou that the favors vouchsafed by Him unto mankind have been and will ever remain limitless in their range. The first and foremost among all these favors which the Almighty hath conferred upon man is the gift of understanding. His purpose in conferring such a gift is none other except to enable His creature to know and recognize the one true God, our purpose. This gift giveth man the power to discern the truth in all things, leadeth him to that which is right, and helpeth him to discover the secrets of creation. This gift of understanding, which is foremost among all the gifts or favors of God to man, is the gift, is what enables us to make good decisions. It's the faculty that we possess to unfold or reveal the mysteries. To be able to look at a situation and to say, this is what I ought to do. This is what needs to be done. But the Baha'u'llah also said in the very next sentence something very interesting to me. And that is, next in rank to the power of understanding is the power of vision. The chief instrument whereby his understanding can function. So, it's important. We all possess this power, this faculty of understanding. But the chief instrument through which it functions is the power of vision. And Baha'u'llah says, let your vision be world embracing rather than confined to your own self. And then it would seem to me then that depending on how broad our vision is, will depend on how our understanding functions.
Not only how broad our vision is, but how enlightened or how illumined it is. It doesn't do you very much good if you have 20/20 vision to be wandering about in the dark. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you aren't allowing yourself, availing yourself of the light that's there in the writings or that's there in the faith. A quote here from Abdu'l-Baha. He says, "We must strive to attain to that condition by being separated from all things and from the people of the world and by turning to God alone. It will take some effort on the part of man to attain to that condition, but he must work for it, strive for it. We can attain to it by thinking and caring less for material things and more for the spiritual. The further we go from the one, the nearer we are to the other. The choice is ours. Our spiritual perception, our vision, our inward sight must be open so that we can see the signs and traces of God's Spirit in everything. Everything can reflect to us the light of the Spirit."
Abdu'l-Baha, when he was in Paris, talked about the fact that human beings have two sentiments, joy and pain. You remember that quotation? And that he said, joy gives us wings. In times of joy, our strength is more vital, our understanding is less clouded, and our intellect is keener, and we seem better able to cope with life and to find our sphere of usefulness. But when sadness visits us, he said, we become weak, our strength leaves us, our comprehension is dim, our intelligence veiled. This is one of my favorite sentences. He says, the actualities of life seem to elude our grasp. Sometimes when I come home and my wife says, "How was the day, honey?" I say, well, the actualities of life seem to elude my grasp. The eyes of our spirits fail to discover the sacred mysteries, and we become even as dead things. And so I think this whole idea about the fact that in times of joy, our strength is more vital, and our intellect is keener, and our understanding is less clouded. Our vision is broad. And I think, one of the things that Abdu'l-Baha said was that the spiritual world bestows only joy. That sadness, all the sadness that we experience comes from this world of illusion, this material world. And so, if the spiritual world bestows only joy, then that's a condition to which I want to be in constantly, or as often as possible, to ensure that I'm going to make the best decisions. Because when I'm joyful, my vision is broad, and my understanding can function, and I can make good decisions. And then my strength is more vital too, and I can carry them out, which is equally important.
I think what we're talking about here with the aspect of joy in our lives, with the aspect of enlightenment in our lives, is the prayerful condition. That's so often talked about in the writings. The prayerful condition where we are alert, where our hearts are in synchrony with that spirit of life in the world, with the force, if you will, where... Well, let me read here what Abdu'l-Baha says about the state of prayer. He says it is the best of conditions, for man is then associating with God. Prayer verily bestoweth life, particularly when offered in private at a time such as midnight, when freed from daily cares. And it would probably do us each good to meditate on what is that prayerful condition, to look at ourselves in light of our prayers and in light of our meditation and consider, what is, for me, that prayerful condition? I don't think anyone can say, "Steve, I don't think you've really hit your prayerful condition." The actualities of life may have eluded your grasp, but, But each of us, for our own selves, can look at oneself and say, what is that prayerful condition, and make it a habit, make it a practice. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about it so we can get a better sense of it.
I think one of the things that I'd like to say about prayer, in addition to what Doug has read, and that is that Abdu'l-Baha said that remembrance of God is like the rain and the dew which bestow freshness and grace on flowers and hyacinths. And I think that it's interesting if we think about our soul as getting dusty during the day, like the flowers out on the country road. and that by the end of the day, there's no freshness to them, there's no fragrance, there's no color, and so on. But through the rain and the dew, they're restored. And prayer can be the same thing for our soul. It restores that freshness.
We're talking about decisions. It may be taking a long time to get there, but I think you can see that we're talking about the kind of foundation, the kind of spiritual climate out of which good, healthy, positive, proactive kinds of decisions are made. Talking about this aspect of joy, and it has such a wonderful connection with prayer that Abdu'l-Baha says it so nicely. He says, the greatest happiness for a lover is to converse with his beloved. And the greatest gift for a seeker is to become familiar with the object of his longing. I mean, how wonderful. How many of us certainly have all experienced love and experienced the happiness of being together with our beloved. And to translate that to a much wider, much broader, much more mystical kind of sense into this prayerful condition of conversing with the best beloved is certainly a wonderful image.
So we talked to the pre-youth this morning. That's a category they say is between 11 and 14. And we were talking a lot about practicing prayer and getting in the mood, as they say, for prayer. And one of the things that I told them that I used to do, and I still do to some degree, is that I want to be in that mood to pray. And so sometimes I'll sit quietly and think about somebody that I love very dearly, and my heart just sort of melts and I forget about a lot of other things, and I just feel a lot of love in my heart, and then I enter into prayer. And I think that practicing like that has been very helpful to me, because it gives me that right attitude to go into prayer, because I'm really pursuing my beloved.
That idea of practice is perhaps, somehow we don't think of that normally in connection with prayer. And you think that somehow we should be able to sit down and we perhaps kind of get hard on ourselves for thinking, well, I'm not really feeling the prayer, I'm not being spiritual enough, and I'm not transformed suddenly enough or quickly enough. But again, with the pre-youth, we were trying to give us some practical analogies, and we were talking about piano playing and how a piano player trains himself or herself day after day, moment after moment, to become better and better and more proficient. And why can't we apply that same kind of training to our spiritual life? A friend of mine at a fireside used to say, we spend so much time taking care of our physical bodies. We brush our teeth. If you're a man, you shave. If you're a woman, you put on makeup, and we print our hair, and we get dressed, and that's 2-3 hours in the day, and maybe whim bang, we've got remover of difficulties and we're on the bus on the way to work. It's a kind of a thing where we have to make time. We have to build in this concept in our heads that we're not going to attain this spirituality all at once, although there's probably a few of us who can. But that it's a daily process, a process of practicing and practicing and practicing. And just like the piano player who stumbles or hits a block every now and then, or a writer who reaches a block, you just keep pushing and pushing, and you break through, and you arrive at a new plateau of this prayerful condition, this prayerful experience.
The Bab, in the selections from the writings of the Bab, wrote, "The most acceptable prayer is the one offered with the utmost spirituality and radiance. Its prolongation hath not been and is not beloved of God. The more detached and the purer the prayer, the more acceptable it is in the presence of God." So it's not necessarily the length of the prayer, how much time is spent in prayer, but the mood you're in, as they say.
Yeah, it's not really perhaps a practicing of technique so much as it is a practicing of an experience, the practicing of this feeling of joyfulness, where Baha'u'llah says, "Recite ye the verses of God in such manner, in such measure that ye be not overtaken with fatigue or boredom. Burden not your soul so as to cause exhaustion and weigh them down, but rather endeavor to lighten them, that they may soar on the wings of revealed verses unto the dawning place of His signs." So I think what we're talking about here is not practicing a technique, which may be important for you, but we're talking about practicing an experience, practicing having that prayerful condition, if even only for an instant, and trying to come back to that each time in your prayers.
I think that prayer and meditation really gives us the vision that we're looking for, that we're talking about. And one of the thoughts that I had about this because I'm distressed quite frequently about the situation of the Baha'is in Iran, and sometimes it really gets me down. Sometimes I'm very saddened about it. And then I read some things from Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha or Shoghi Effendi about how these things need to happen sometimes, and that we shouldn't be distressed because in the long run, what's important. But you see, if I don't have the vision, I don't think of the long run. And Baha'u'llah wrote that if, however, for a few days in compliance with God's all-encompassing wisdom, outward affairs should run their course contrary to one's cherished desire, this is of no consequence and should not matter. Our intent is that all the friends should fix their gaze on the supreme horizon and cling to that which hath been revealed in the tablets. And the thing that I told the young people about that is that if we fix our gaze on the supreme horizon, we're going to have that vision. And I told them that what it's like to be driving in a car or riding in a car and to be trying to look down at the ground directly beside the car. Everything's out of focus. It's even nauseating to look at it very long. And I think if we look at today's events, we're going to be very nauseated and very distressed about it. But if we lift our head up and fix our gaze on that supreme horizon, what God has intended for man, and so on, and we know it will inevitably occur, our heart is full of joy. And everything is in focus. We can understand the events of today in light of God's destiny for man. It's that broad vision again.
So it seems that in this part of the process of making decisions, we've got to establish ourselves in some kind of prayerful condition, at least to provide ourselves with the basis out of which we can practice perhaps other kinds of things that will lead to intelligent decisions.
Now, I don't want to spend very much time on meditation. We can talk about it later or in the lobby later or whatever, just because of time. But of course, we know that meditation is a law of God, a law of Baha'u'llah. He said that we must pray and meditate. And there's some very specific tablets from Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha about meditation. Meditation is reflecting, to some degree, or one way of looking at it is meditation is reflecting on God's purpose for us and our relationship to God and the association that we experience when we pray. All right? And we're oftentimes inspired through this contemplation, through this meditation, to make certain decisions. But and rather than, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on meditation, but I will read a quick quotation from a letter written on behalf of the Guardian about inspiration, because sometimes I think we can get carried away with this idea of intuition and inspiration and so on. With regard to your question as to the value of intuition as a source of guidance for the individual, implicit faith in our intuitive powers is unwise. But through daily prayer and sustained effort, one can discover, though not always and fully, God's will intuitively. Under no circumstances, however, can a person be absolutely certain that he is recognizing God's will. Through the exercise of his intuition, it often happens that the latter results in completely misrepresenting the truth and thus becomes a source of error rather than of guidance.
Well, I was going to say, I think before we move away from meditation, it's helpful for those of us who perhaps became Baha'is around 1970, and there was a lot of discussion about the right kind of technique, and you had to have a mantra to meditate and all of this stuff, that Baha'u'llah doesn't prescribe any of those kinds of things, and that simply stated, meditation means to dwell upon. So to find that quiet state within ourselves, and then to dwell upon, and to turn to our spirit, that's what the writings are talking about, that we don't have to worry about a certain technique, and that we shouldn't meditate unless we have the technique, or if we're not sitting in the right posture, or reciting the right mantra.
Well, Baha'u'llah said that foremost among all these favors that God has given us is this gift of understanding. He also said that the maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. And there's there's a lot of emphasis on consultation in our writings.
It's almost a law of God, too. In fact, it's one of the foundations of our administrative order, let alone our individual and collective life.
That's right. And I guess what it boils down to, Abdul Baha said, he said, look, it's a lot easier to move something heavy with 4 people than it is with 2 people, you know. And he said, when you're consulting, the object is to show that 2 heads are better than 1. All right? So we need to seek out wise people and people that we can confide in and share with them and ask their opinions. Consultation is maturity of the gift of understanding is made manifest through consultation. It's extremely important in making decisions. And we mustn't ever think that just because we pray and meditate and feel inspired that we're always going to make the right decision. We need to seek out all different points of view.
And it's been very enlightening to me as a Baha'i to strive to get a better understanding of the power of consultation. That as an alternative or as an option that it is for us. It's a prescribed kind of method by the manifestation of God Himself for problem solving. By organizing a group of people who would speak frankly and consult and share their opinions in an honest and loving, kind and thoughtful manner is a way to solve problems. And in a way, it certainly is a way to make decisions. Man must consult on all matters, said Abdul Baha, whether major or minor, so that he may become cognizant of what is good. Consultation giveth him insight into things and enableth him to delve into questions which are unknown. The light of truth shineth from faces of those who engage in consultation. That's a very powerful statement. It's a very powerful statement to say that the light of truth shineth from faces of those who engage in consultation. So there, perhaps, is a power that we're just now learning to use in our individual lives and on assemblies and so forth, that we can use in our individual decision making.
It's important to draw on the strength within the Baha'i community, but of course it would be foolish to think that we only need to consult Baha'is because somehow they're the only ones that know what direction we should be going, because there's lots of qualified professionals in the world who are experts in some area, and people that have had years and years of experience doing a particular thing or whatever. And so we shouldn't ever rule out the fact that, while considering the fact that they may have a different point of view, not being Baha'i, may have an awful lot to offer us as far as practical advice on subjects.
The Guardian even said that we should have all kinds of consultation. Villagers should consult with each other. The members of a village should consult with each other on what course to take with specific problems. He said, in like manner, the members of each profession, such as in industry, should consult. And those in commerce should similarly consult on business affairs. So it's very interesting that the writings are suggesting that consultation enter into all of the avenues, all the arenas of human endeavor, and as a way of progressing and as a way of stimulating growth and development.
But there's something special about consulting with your Baha'i friends, I think. And one of the things that the Guardian has said is that indeed the believers have not yet fully learned to draw on each other's love for strength and consolation in time of need. The cause of God is endowed with tremendous powers, and the reason the believers do not gain more from it is because they've not yet learned to fully draw on these mighty forces of love and strength and harmony generated by the faith.
This idea of consulting with our Baha'i brothers and sisters, our Baha'i family, is also further confirmed when the Guardian is talking about nothing short of the spirit of a true Baha'i can hope to reconcile the principles of mercy and justice, of freedom on the one hand and submission, of the sanctity of the right of the individual and of self-surrender, of vigilance, discretion, and prudence on the one hand, and fellowship, candor, and courage on the other.
Now, we've talked about God's purpose for man, this force, trying to get in tune with that, to flow with it, make the best decisions, and that we do that through prayer and meditation, and that by consulting people of all areas that might be related to the kind of decision we want to make, we'll gather the facts necessary to make the best decisions and so on. Now, of course, there's this whole other component of determination and faith and perseverance and those kinds of things. And we must always remember that if we're doing something that's in congruence with this force, this will of God, that we're going to be aided and assisted in accomplishing whatever we're trying to do. In fact, the Universal House of Justice wrote, if the Baha'is will do their part, however unpromising the prospect, Baha'u'llah is able to open doors and change conditions in ways beyond our understanding. So there's sort of this component that even though things may look impossible, we may arrive at a decision and then look at the possibilities of carrying that out and say, it's impossible. We always must remember that as Baha'is, if we're doing things to serve the faith, and if we're doing things in congruence with God's will, that Baha'u'llah can open doors and change conditions in ways beyond our understanding, and that any assessment of any situation is entirely misleading if we don't take this consideration into our minds when we're trying to make a decision to carry out something.
I think this question of confidence is very vital and very important, because the Guardian has stated in one instance that is often where we fall short in carrying out our decisions. That we make a decision, and if we make a decision based on this prayerful condition, based on consultation with our friends if we feel it's necessary, with the institutions if we feel that's necessary, and then proceed to make a decision and to take action, oftentimes where we fall short is that we don't have confidence. I think it's because we don't give ourselves enough credit. Or perhaps don't give God enough credit. God has given us this gift of understanding. He's given us these tools. He's given us the ability to tap into this prayerful condition, to tap into the force, and so we can proceed confidently. Even when Stephen says things look absolutely impossible.
And I guess another thing is, we could spend the whole afternoon talking about, fear of risk, taking a risk or making a mistake and so on, but we have to remember that we just do the best job we can at arriving at a decision and then carry it out. And if it's a mistake, well, you know that God is merciful, and that if we're living in a good Baha'i community, that everyone else is going to be merciful and loving and so on, and we don't have to worry about failure. We just pick it up and try again and do the best job we can.
Also, by and large, making decision does not involve one right decision. It often involves a number of alternatives of several right decisions. This idea of determination is very significant too in allowing your decision to take action and to be fruitful. The harder you strive to attain your goal, said the Guardian, the greater will be the confirmations of Baha'u'llah, and the more certain you can feel to attain success. That determination, that movement, that drive to accomplish a decision.
And that constant consciousness of the power of Baha'u'llah to assist us gives us tremendous confidence. Like we can't fail, like there's nothing we can't do. And if we're constantly conscious of that, we're confident all the time. Well, any questions on this part? We're going to be talking now about some specific principles relating to life pursuits and things like that in service to the faith. But any questions or comments so far? Yeah, you have.
You were talking about consultation. Were you referring to utilizing the assembly as the consultation?
Absolutely, and I'm ashamed that I haven't mentioned that, but obviously that's a source of tremendous advice and inspiration and encouragement and so on. When we're making decisions, we always have that resource. And of course, when it's affecting the faith, we almost automatically should go to the local spiritual assembly and ask them for their advice. And then we should be prepared to follow their advice. Yes?
I just wanted to add about the strength that it gives the assembly and the experience and the power that's generated. I think benefits the whole community.
Good.
Specifically that assembly.
Good point. For those of you who couldn't hear, she was saying that the fact of turning to the assembly helps the assembly develop too by giving it experience and so on. That's a good point. Other comments or questions about, yeah?
If we can never be sure of the will of God, How do we submit our will to the will of God?
Well, we can say.
Write it down.
Right on the head.
No, we can say. We can always look back and say, "Oh, that must have been the will of God." I don't know. That's a good question. I guess we can say that submitting our will to the will of God is, in one way, would be the act of saying, I'm going to follow Baha'u'llah's teachings as to the death. There's nothing that's going to make me stray from the path that Baha'u'llah has designed for me as an individual. He's given me laws. He's given me the institutions. And I'm not going to stray from that. That's the will of God for man for this day. All right? As far as whether we should go to the dentist or wait till next year or those kind of things, I don't know what's God's will.
I think people mislead themselves in a lot of ways when they say that I'm doing this for the will of God. You know, there is a lot with the fundamentalist Christians, for example, who believe so strongly that what they are doing as individuals is definitely the will of God, God's will. And you read these bizarre reports in the newspapers about people who've done crazy things on behalf of the will of God. I don't think that's what the Baha'i faith is doing for us as individuals. It's giving us a personal plan for God's plan personally for us. The Baha'i faith gives us a set of principles. It gives us the boundaries, so to speak. It gives us the program on how to get from point A to point B, from where we are now to success in life, in the spiritual sense. And that what we strive to accomplish as individuals through our own free will, through our own sustained effort and determination and gift of understanding, is fulfilling the will of God. It's like the marriage vow. Verily, we will all abide by the will of God. And when you think about that, well, what do you mean we will all abide by the will of God? That's the statement of a commitment that you will do the best of your ability to create unity and to bring about a solid family. That is the will of God, I think. We're not talking here so much about an individual prescribed plan as we are living in accordance with certain principles and taking on life as best we can with all of our strength.
Between the spiritual and also professional knowledge and everything. And what we're trying to do is seek a balance between the two and not let one or the other become the sole force behind our decision.
That's a good question. I agree with you to some extent. However, that doesn't leave much room for sacrifice. Because sacrifice is somewhat abandoning the practical. And sacrificial service to the cause or sacrificial service to may be required at certain times, for example, in our life, and we'll abandon practical advice for pursuing that. But that's when we sort of, well, Ria Khanum said that when she said it's kind of like an airplane. That was her analogy. She said, when the airplane's trundling along on the ground, it's got all the reference points and it knows where everything is and so on. And it's pursuing a nice moderate course, but when it decides to fly up into the heavens and above the clouds, there's no more reference points. And it's right here. It's how it feels. And you've got to just rely on your intuition and through prayer and meditation that you're doing the right thing. That's, and whenever, the guardian, or any of the central figures encouraged us to always pursue a moderate course, okay? To raise a family, or to make money and to spend it for ourselves and for the cause, and to everything in moderation. But whenever there was any sacrificial service, it was praised by these central figures. So it's a mystery to me.
Well, life always involved in moderate situations that allow us sacrifice.
That's right. Okay.
I was just in connection with your question. There's one interesting statement here that doesn't speak so directly to professional kinds of considerations, but does talk about a healthy social life. A healthy social life and Baha'i work can go hand in hand, but not always in times of crisis. such as these days, the cause is passing through. So, and the world, when great sacrifice can alone meet the demands of the situations. So yes, in principle, but not right now.
Yeah, the whole idea of sacrifice is you were talking about the people who did make sacrifices as central figures, praised those people, but the people who were making those sacrifices did not see them as sacrifices.
Okay, that's a good point.
And when we start talking about sacrificing, I get a bit uncomfortable because I often wonder if people really say, okay, I'm going to sacrifice now, or do they see an action that must be taken and they take the action that must be taken as they see it?
I think that's the way I see it. No, I'm serious. I think that service to the faith, and well, why wait? Let's get into that right now. Service to the faith, I always think that because serving on the auxiliary board and so on, I spent time with Baha'is in many different communities and so on. One of the things, of course, that's always distressing is that when in every community there's Baha'is that seem to serve the cause with more vigor than others. Okay? And that can sometimes be more or less distressing to the ones that are serving, they think, with more vigor. Okay? And so there's always this confusion. And I guess my point of view is always that this is a religion. And we're moved to do these things because we're in pursuit of pleasing our beloved. And the more we love, the more we'll sacrifice from the practical perspective. I mean, if there's any kind of thing that we can call normal, the deviation from normal will depend exactly on the intensity of our love. And so I guess I have this little axiom about the more you know Baha'u'llah, the more you love him. And the more you love him, the more you'll serve him. It's a very simple thing to me. And I can't expect that through regulation or instructions anyone is going to give sacrificial service or can be expected to. It's just a normal thing for some people that, yes, they've consciously made the decision that they're going to give like this. And to them, it may not be a sacrifice at all. To us, looking at it from another angle, it may be abandoning something practical. Now, there was a hand way in the back. Go ahead.
I was just going to share something going back to the question about when do we know it's the will of God, or are my motives pure, or something like this. And I find that I myself tend to do that a lot, agonize over, am I doing the right thing? And a very helpful moment came in the Pioneer Institute when I asked Ms. Eva Truth, ex-chancellor Ms. Eva Truth. She sort of hemmed and hawed, and she said, well, you've decided to do it, so off yourself, do it. You know,
yeah.
This element of action.
Sure.
So there comes a point where you just have to toss your doubts to the wind and
yeah, that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you're speaking of decisions as being, or giving me the impressions that decision processing is a process of reaching an absolute. And Shoghi Effendi says that there is only one constant in the universe, and that's the constant law of change. So whatever decision you make, whatever process you go through, by the time you get there, and sometimes however long the process is, by the time you get to the end, it'll probably be changed anyway. So it's learning to live with a process of constant change and adjusting and seeking the right advice, and this is where it seems to me that what you're saying about the attitude that you approach your decisions becomes more important than the actual decision itself, because you can always adjust the decision.
Now, why didn't I say that? You know, Abdu'l-Baha said that, Abdu'l-Baha said, or this is actually written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi in a letter to an individual believer. Abdu'l-Baha said, we must sacrifice the important for the most important. The most important thing for now is that the most important thing now for the Baha'is is to accomplish their plan. The sacrifice of other activities, cultural or otherwise, is not of very much importance compared to their goal. They can always return when they have more time to such pursuits.
Of course, we're in a time of crisis now, so that'll probably be a few generations.
Well, he said to serve any great cause or purpose requires sacrifice. I mean, it's just not going to go anywhere. Any great cause requires selflessness, sacrifice, altruism to get anywhere. That's the way a cause is established. Yeah.
I really appreciate the fact that you're not treating this simplistically, that you don't have any simple, clear answers. I'm really suspicious of simple,
Wait till our
clear answers.
conclusion.
But when you talk about sacrifice, I guess in some people's lives, the sacrifice always seems to be not their sacrifice, but their children's, their mates, their parents, and that's a hard sacrifice to deal with. I really wonder about that. I might make a really great decision, but if what I'm sacrificing is not my time only, which I'm happy to do, as was said over there. I mean, it's, sacrificing the important for the more important, but getting the feeling from everyone or some of the people around me that I'm sacrificing them.
Oh, sure.
Then I get worried, and that's where I think a number of Baha'is might find themselves in the same quandary, or maybe somebody is...
I think we all must struggle with that. In fact, I think that for generations we've struggled with that, because when I've gone through many of the letters of the Guardian, I see letter after letter written on his behalf on this theme. There's a couple of you, yeah. Let me read this one on the family, and then you can read this one on the children. Okay. In considering this is from the House of Justice. In considering the problems that you and your wife are experiencing, the House of Justice points out that the unity of your family should take priority over any other consideration. For example, service to the cause should not produce neglect of the family. It's important for you to arrange your time so that your family life is harmonious and your household receives the attention it requires. Okay, this is just one way of looking at it.
In a lot of ways, it's easy to think of service in pretty outward forms. For those that are more immediately gratifying, shall we say, those kinds of service that are more immediately gratifying are more easily recognized as being service. And we have to perhaps redefine it for ourselves in making these decisions about sacrifice. What is service? Like the quote said earlier. The service that a mother performs for her children, or the father performs for his children. The service that children provide for their parents. And the great lengths that the Guardian that went to ensure that if this one particular child went pioneering, what would it do to his father? And advised him that it would create a great rift between them, that he not even go. Although Baha'i services should be undertaken with the spirit of sacrifice, one cannot lose sight of the importance given in our holy writings to the responsibilities placed on parents in relationship to their children, as well as to the duties of children towards their parents.
Here's a good one here. Surely Shoghi Effendi would like to see you and the other friends give their whole time and energy to the cause, for we are in great need for competent workers. But the home is an institution that Baha'u'llah has come to strengthen, not to weaken. Many unfortunate things have happened in Baha'i homes just for neglecting this point. Serve the cause, but also remember your duties toward your home. It's for you to find the balance and see that neither makes you neglect the other. We would have many more... Oh, no, I shouldn't read this, but I'll read it. We would have many more husbands in the cause were the wives more thoughtful and moderate in their Baha'i activities.
I
don't know.
I agree with
I think you'll have a lot of questions on that. Citation on that.
Want a reference?
This is a nice summary, though, of this whole dilemma. I mean, I don't mean to reduce it to a few lines, but any plan, or this is the Guardian, on behalf of the Guardian, any plan or arrangement you may arrive at which would combine your twofold duties towards your family and the cause, and would permit you to resume active work in the field of pioneer teaching, and also to take good care of your children, so as not to jeopardize their future in the cause, would meet with a wholehearted approval of the Guardian.
That balance. Yeah.
Would you define the word sacrifice for me? I'm not quite sure the sacrifice exists.
Yeah. Okay. I think that the way we're talking about it right now, maybe I could ask some scholar in the room to do this, but the way we're talking about it right now is probably just a deviation from moderation. Okay. Is that safe?
Sacrifice means to make sacred in service to God.
Okay, here's the one definition. Sacrifice means to make sacred in service to God. Sounds like it came right out of the dictionary. It did. Okay.
Someone who knows her sacrifice.
All right.
I'd like to just maybe re-emphasize the point that was made earlier about sacrifice. That the Valley of Love and the Seven Valleys, there's Majnun is searching even in the dust for his beloved. And everybody thinks he's crazy, but he's so much in love that he does that. And I think that when we think of sacrifice in those kinds of terms, we kind of discard all of the calculations in our checkbooks about how much to give to the fund. I don't mean to say that that's not a good idea, which I think it is. But we kind of get away from this calculating idea that I can give this much and a little bit more is going to hurt. Because someone who is in love will do anything and go to any length to be with his beloved. Someone who is in love will just really, to the outward world, act kind of crazy. Won't eat, stay up late, will wait outside her window so he can catch a glimpse of her, to hear her voice. And I think that's really, if we could re-emphasize any point about sacrifice, that would be the one to talk about. That it's really a spiritual kind of condition, that we're talking about love, and that we're talking about getting back to this whole aspect of devotion, this prayerful condition, this wanting to commune with your beloved, and really let that be the basis, let that be the standard of your decision making. Because if you're afraid of losing someone's love, you'll do anything to keep that love. And I think that's what sacrifice is just the result of that process.
Yeah.
To me, doesn't it seem like that the love of God, the love for God and the fear are the mixture of it? Someone recently mentioned to me, it was an interesting thing that you said. Recently I have been very fearful of losing God's love, and I felt like that I was losing, the love of God for me. And someone said, you notice that even when we love someone else, we are frightened of losing them. So it's a recent thing I discovered that I'd like to share, that it seems like it's a mixture of both. Even though Baha'u'llah refers to it, when you become submitted, the fear turns to love. But still, in other passages, he says, fear God and he will teach you. So that's a
very nice, positive way of working.
And to me, when I read the poems of Tahireh, to her sacrifice, the love for her, it was a bound to give these sacrifices. For us, because we're so attached to it, is letting go of it. We want to hold on to it. It's the same story that about the man who was holding on to the tree, and didn't want to let go of it. But to me, sacrifice is no sacrifice unless I'm really attached to it.
There was another, yes.
I'm back on decisions and balance.
Okay, let's see. Go ahead.
What page is that? I think the success of our learning how to make good decisions and how to balance our lives in the Baha'i framework is highly dependent upon the support of our community. How tolerant our community is in viewing our mistakes. In other words, for some people, maybe the decision process is just, in your analogy of the airplane, touching once or twice before going up into flight. And if it turns out they made a bad decision, we as a community have to be tolerant and not say that individual is very emotional. They're very up in the clouds. They need to be a little more scientific before they make a decision. or the individual who is bouncing on the runway for months, which is analogous to going to every assembly in the district and talking to all your friends and looking in the books, and then maybe finally bouncing into the air and giving their ego to Baha'u'llah. And if they should happen to make a mistake, we can't go to that individual and say, hey, you should have released yourself a long time ago and let the ethers carry you. So I think the community plays a very important role in how well we learn, how well they support us in our process of trying to figure out how do I make a good decision, in our process of trying to figure out what is balanced in our lives. None of us know the answer. As one lady said, there is no simple answer. We're learning, and we need the support of the community to raise us up and give us encouragement when we stumble.
That's a good point. In fact, I really appreciate the comments today. They've been wonderful so far. That's a way of saying we're running out of time. No, I really, in response to that, there is a nice quotation from The Guardian about this, that how to curb our learning to curb our individualism. And one of the things that it talks about in relationship to our community and so on is that Baha'i community life implies a consciousness of group solidarity strong enough to enable each individual Baha'i to give up what is essentially personal for the good of the common weal. And I think that what this requires is that
run that play again.
Okay. Baha'i community life implies a consciousness of group solidarity strong enough to allow each individual to give up what is essentially personal for the good of the common weal. In other words, it's like consultation, and it's like when we're consulting and we give up one of our ideas because another idea may be better for the community as a whole or for the unity and so on. And I think that, but what this implies is that, and this is very important for our own spiritual growth and that network of friends and drawing on the forces in the community, and that is that we all have this ideal, that's Abdu'l-Baha, that we're all working towards. And knowing what we have to do to get there from wherever we are around this ideal, or how far out we are, because only we can really make that judgment based on our own evaluation, is by making an accurate assessment of ourselves. And of course we do that through prayer and analyzing our actions and so on, okay? Now, if we feel defensive at all in our community or with the people around us, we're not going to make an accurate assessment. We're bound to cheat a little and say, well, we think we're a little better than we are or whatever. And if we make an inaccurate assessment, then when we set our course, it may be an inaccurate course. Okay, so what I mean by that is that it's so important to have love in the community and unity in the community, because when I make an assessment of my own state, spiritual state or whatever, I know that if I find myself a long way away from my goal, then I'm not going to get laughed at by everybody in my community. And I can say, okay, here I am, and I'm charging ahead. But if I'm defensive about the way other people are looking at me, I'm apt to make an inaccurate assessment. And if I'm making we can fool ourselves. We can make ourselves think a lot of things that aren't true. And if I make an inaccurate assessment, then there's a good chance that I'm going to set the wrong course for my pursuit of my beloved. Okay? Or I'm be fooling myself. So it's very important as far as making decisions based on Baha'i principles relating to our community, that we remember that unity is of utmost importance, and loving each other like brothers and sisters is absolutely essential for establishing that unity. Boy, have you heard that a lot? But boy, isn't it true? And that's one of the ways that it relates. We can give each other a break by loving each other, because there's no way I'm going to make an accurate assessment of where I am spiritually if I feel defensive at all.
Well, it gets back to this whole idea too of joy giving us wings, and that we are mentally alert, and that we're happy, and that our mind is free, that our gift of understanding is clear. When we have love, when we feel loved, that certainly gives us joy. It certainly feels it's like a child in the family having love. Studies have been done to show that children who come from loving families do better in school. They're brighter. They're more proficient at what they do. They're more confident. And in the same way in a community, extend that concept of the family to the community, and the same things apply. When we have that love in the community, when I feel loved in the community, I feel confident. I feel happy about myself. I feel good about myself. And I feel brighter and clearer about it.
Yeah. In some ways, it seems like attaining that state is also enabling you to fulfill one of the purposes of existence is to know yourself.
Exactly.
Because you can make the clear assessment of yourself also.
That's right. Good point. Now, the head cornerstone of all Baha'i service, of course, is teaching. And there are many ways of teaching. We chose not to talk an awful lot about teaching at this session just because we're talking more about the process of making decisions and so on. But I'd like to sort of wind up things this afternoon by talking about teaching as far as all the different avenues of teaching. The fact that when we're Baha'i-like, we're teaching. Abdu'l-Baha says, of course, that's not enough. We must deliver the message, too. But when we're living Baha'i-like lives, we're teaching. And service to the faith can mean everything. That's why what makes it so wonderful in this dispensation is that Abdu'l-Baha has explained that no matter what we do, we can be serving God. And no matter what we do, if it's done in the right spirit, it's regarded or elevated to the rank of worship. Even cleanliness and hygiene. But there are laws of Baha'u'llah about cleanliness and hygiene. And if we follow these laws in the right spirit, we're worshiping God. I told my wife after the 20-minute shower. Well, honey, I was worshiping. And the studying the arts and the sciences in accordance with the divine teachings, Abdu'l-Baha said, the acquisition of the sciences and the perfection of the arts are considered acts of worship. What bounty greater than this, that science should be considered as an act of worship? And there's one on craftsmanship and profession. In this universal dispensation, Abdu'l-Baha said, man's wondrous craftsmanship is reckoned as worship of the resplendent beauty. Consider what a bounty and blessing it is that craftsmanship is regarded as worship. You have the one on the profession?
I have the one on finances.
Oh, that's
we were talking about. Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the neat. Well, let me read this one on profession. I get so excited when I read about these things because there isn't anything in our life that we can't make worship if it's done in the right spirit. And of course, it's always teaching.
It gets back to that quote that we mentioned earlier where Abdu'l-Baha said that everything has the power to reflect the light of God.
Thus, thou must endeavor greatly so that thou mayest become unique in thy profession and famous in those parts. Because Abdu'l-Baha says that perfection in one's profession in this merciful period is considered to be worship of God. And whilst thou art occupied with thy profession, thou canst remember the true one. That's the key, done in the right spirit. But I like this one on finances.
This one on finances is a new twist on wealth, perhaps with this dispensation. O my servant, the best of men.
Probably women, too.
The best of men are they that earn a livelihood by their calling, and spend upon themselves and upon their kindred for the love of God, the Lord of all worlds.
You know, with the way you emphasize that, you could almost say, for the love of God, spend on yourself.
There's this kind of anti-wealth bias that perhaps some of us have.
Yeah.
I was going to say, one thing I liked in the slideshow about Paul Haney last night was how he liked to golf, and he golfed once a week, and he spent money on golf clubs. You know, it made him seem like just an ordinary man, and like, there's nothing wrong with indulging yourself a little bit once in a while. And he still, of course, is very dedicated to the cause.
That's a good point.
It's that talk Glenford Mitchell gave at the National Convention about not being ashamed of our materialism.
Yeah.
That was in there.
Good point. Any other comments? Yeah.
One more is that we've got to live with one foot on the spirit world and one foot on the real world, and we can't, without having the material goods, we couldn't live. Period.
Yeah.
We need both.
That's a good point. I like that. I think that one of the things that that I like to think a lot about as far as making decisions is that God has said, or Baha'u'llah has said, noble have I created thee, wherewith dost thou base thyself. And I think that when we're setting priorities, we always have to think about that. Noble have I created thee, yet thou hast to base thyself. Rise then onto that for which thou wast created. And when we meditate and we're making decisions, we must also always think about what's going to make us more noble and what's going to abase us. And if we know what's going on in the 7-year plan, and we know if we're in touch with this force, we got the best chance of making the best decisions.
There's a quote here from Abdul Baha that says the little children must, it could apply to us too, that's the way I thought of it when I read it anyway. The little children must needs be aware in their very heart and soul that Baha'i is not just a name, but a truth. And there's a lovely quote here from Abdul Baha too about the process of learning as a Baha'i, the process of gaining knowledge from every avenue in life, as well as serving in every avenue of life. He says that the cause of God is like unto a college. The believers are like unto the students. The college is founded for the sake of acquirements of science, arts, and literature. If the sciences are not therein and the scholars are not educated, the object of the college is not achieved. The students must show the results of their study in their deportment and deeds. Otherwise they have wasted their lives. Now the friends must must so live and conduct themselves as to bring greater glory and results to the religion of God. To them the cause of God must be a dynamic force, transforming the lives of men, and not a question of meetings, committees, futile discussions, unnecessary debates, and political wire pulling.
Political wire pulling. Are there any other comments before we close? Or questions? Yeah.
I asked a question. I don't know what the point of the question is that. I've heard the concept repeatedly that we're embryonic and growing, and obviously we are. We're not nobody. But we have writings that I don't think are embryonic. They're, to me, in the contemplative process, they're the facts, besides other facts, including making decisions. How do you mix the fact, question, that the writings are a fact and given consultation, they take precedence over other things and have to be applied, with the idea that people are embryonic and don't necessarily, reach the perfection of the writings. In other words, I don't know, maybe I'm not saying that right, but in other words, when you read something like you're not supposed to drink, because that's a major law, but there's other things, and yet you hear this, well, we're not perfect, we're embryonic, so some of us do drink, or some of us do this. In your consultation, what happens when you have this problem? Embryonic, and therefore the writings are compromised. I guess the idea of how do you avoid compromises in the writing and consultation?
You're reading in the infinite and practicing in the finite.
Well, one of the ways that I look at this is that the House of Justice has given us the laws that we must obey of Baha'u'llah right now. Not all of the laws that Baha'u'llah has revealed are applicable to us in the West right now. Okay? But the way I look at it is that all of the laws that are revealed for us right now are applicable to us. We as Baha'is have the capability of observing. And although we may have weaknesses, we all have the capability of trying. Now, I think that maybe I found a quotation I was going to use as a conclusion, but it might be very appropriate to read it right now. Shoghi Effendi said, "We must not only be patient with others, infinitely patient, but also with our own poor selves, remembering that even the prophets of God sometimes got tired and cried out in despair. He urges you to persevere and add up your accomplishments rather than to dwell on the dark side of things. Everyone's life has both a dark and a bright side. The Master said, 'Turn your back to the darkness and your face to me.'" Other comments? Questions? Pardon? Sure.
Just an additional thing to that. He says in the writings that we're also supposed to bring ourselves to a county experience. And I have found a lot of Baha'is that I've associated with that we get very abusive with ourselves. We're still hung up with the three whams. And we can get very depressed about our failings and how far we fall short of it, how embryonic we are, or whatever. And I think bringing ourselves to account each day also has to do with bringing ourselves to account what we did good as well. I mean, it seems that each person is more sensitive to one than the other. They're either very cynical about themselves and are very down on themselves, or they're very egotistical and they think they're great. You kind of have to balance it out one way or the other. If you think that you're absolutely wonderful, maybe you should put a little more stress on what you did wrong. And if you, I like to hear that. Where did you get that quote?
That was from a wonderful new book called Unfolding Destiny. It's letters from the Guardian to the Baha'is of the British Isles.
I never heard him say that specifically. It's so hard.
Yeah, we should be patient with our own poor selves.
Did you read it again?
Sure. We must not only be patient with others, infinitely patient, but also with our own poor selves, remembering that even the prophets of God sometimes got tired and cried out in despair. He urges you to persevere and add up your accomplishments rather than to dwell on the dark side of things. Everyone's life has both the dark and a bright side. The Master said, "Turn your back to the darkness and your face to me." You know, there's some value in the fact that we sometimes feel inadequate and that we are inadequate. In other words, I'm saying our perceptions are accurate, unfortunately. You're right, we're embryonic. But I got good news and bad news. Okay. The Guardian said, so you see, your sense of inadequacy, your realization of your own unworthiness is not unique at all. Many from the highest to the humblest have had it. Now the wisdom of it is this. Are you ready? It is such seemingly weak instruments that demonstrate that God is the power achieving the victories and not men. If you were a wealthy, prominent, strong individual and liked going out there as fun, he's talking about a pioneering field, any service you render and victories you have would be laid to your personality, not to the cause of God. But because the reverse is true, your services will be a witness to the power of Baha'u'llah and the truth of his faith. so we can feel good about being an editor.
Thank God I'm a bumbling fool.
Yeah.
What's the source on that one?
That's also Unfolding Destiny, page 459.
Here, run on the bookstore after this class.
That one is on page 456 and 7. Yeah. Would you? Oh, is it time to go?
Yeah.
Well, there's a quote that I want to remember. That one about the Baha'u'llah's blessings are worthy. Where was that? I think maybe it's an inspiration, perseverance, or something. Organized.
You know, when Steve and I were preparing for this, we talked on the phone and we decided to get, 20 or 30 quotes together. And so Steve brought 50.
And he brought 25. Okay, I have one final quote, and this is one that I read a long time ago. In fact, it was in 1976, I think I read this in Green Lake. Know that this is from Abdul Baha. Know that the blessings of the kingdom of Abha are not dependent upon the capacity and worthiness of anyone. Abdul Baha wrote, the blessings themselves are the worthiness. As the action itself, when it reaches the thing acted upon, makes it that which is acted upon the action. In other words, if we can imagine a ball sitting on tee in the golf, since we use golf, that is inert, it can't go down to the hole by itself or down the fairway by itself. It's inert. But when the action reaches it, that which is acted upon, it makes it that which is acted upon the action. And so the blessings of Baha'u'llah are not dependent upon our worthiness. But when they reach us, then our capacity is transformed. Okay? Or our capacity is the blessings of Baha'u'llah. It's that ability that so the blessings themselves then become identical with our worthiness. And because the blessings of Baha'u'llah are limitless, so is our worthiness. Why don't we close with a prayer?
O Lord, render victorious thy forbearing servants in thy days, by granting them a befitting victory, inasmuch as they have sought martyrdom in thy path. Send down upon them that which will bring comfort to their minds, will rejoice their inner beings, will impart assurance to their hearts and tranquility to their bodies, and will enable their souls to ascend to the presence of God the most exalted, and to attain the supreme paradise, and such retreats of glory as thou hast destined for men of true knowledge and virtue. Verily thou knowest all things, while we are but thy servants, thy thralls, thy bondsmen, and thy poor ones. No Lord but thee do we invoke, our Lord, O God our Lord. Nor do we implore blessings or grace from anyone but thee, O thou who art the God of mercy unto this world and the next. We are but the embodiments of poverty, of nothingness, of helplessness, and of perdition, while thy whole being betokeneth wealth, independence, glory, majesty, and boundless grace. Turn our recompense, O Lord, to that which well beseemeth thee, of the good of this world and of the next, and of the manifold bounties which extend from on high down to the earth below. Verily thou art our Lord and the Lord of all things. Unto thy hands do we surrender ourselves, yearning for the things that pertain unto thee.